Hi, I'm Sarah Baker. Welcome to Mama Stories. I created Mama Stories after seeing how impactful sharing stories can be in overcoming the challenges of motherhood. I am where I am today because of the stories of so many amazing, strong mamas. And I want to share that with anyone I can. So follow along to laugh, cry, and be empowered. On the show today, we have Jen. Jen, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's talk all about motherhood.
So thanks for having me. I'm an OBGYN and my husband is a pediatrician, and we met in medical school. He was a year ahead of me and was the president of a club. And I guess that just the power of that, I could not resist.
Yes, of course.
And so we met that way. And also it was great because he could give me all the study tips since he was a year ahead. So
That's nice.
I think he academically helped me very much. And then we couples matched. So when you are done with medical school and then you do your specialty training, your residency training, it's kind of like a weird dating process where you apply and programs interview you and you make your match list and they make their match list and the computer makes it work. And you throw the extra monkey wrench of doing a couples match, where you say, we will only go to a place that will take both of us. So it can be kind of limiting. And so
Because you guys were already serious enough to be like, if we're going to start, you dated all through medical school, or?
We did. And then we were engaged our third year. Excuse me. Yeah, no, we went to medical school in New Orleans. We both went to Tulane, and we were there at the time of Hurricane Katrina, which was super fun. And it was sort of that event where I think after we had evacuated and the craziness that ensued, I think we were like, if we can do this, we can probably be married and do anything. So then we were engaged, and then we got married right at the end of medical school, right before residency. So in that interview time, we were engaged. And so we interviewed everywhere because you need to play the odds game. And we ended up, we have no connections to the Pacific Northwest, but we interviewed at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon, and we just loved both the programs. So we matched. And we ranked that and we matched there. And then we got married, like I said, before we started residency. And I was the kind of girl, I was never going to have kids because I was a working woman and I was going to, I was not going to let kids get in the way of my high powered career and all that stuff. And then that went out the window. My friends started having babies, and there's no perfect time. I think if there's anything people can take away is that there's no perfect time to have kids. My last year of residency, we call that our chief year. That's when we had our first in December. So right in the middle of my last year of training. And that was crazy. It was the perfect time for us, but it was the hardest 6 months of my life to then go back and finish.
Oh yeah.
It was, just craziness. And then we finished residency, moved back to the Northeast for a bit, and worked there. And then as soon as we got there, we realized, why did we leave the Pacific Northwest? And so we moved back to Portland in 2014, and we've been here ever since. And then the day that we got back into Portland was the day I found out I was pregnant with our second. And so I've got two boys. They're 4.5 years apart. And they were two very different pregnancies, going from being in residency and working 80 hours a week and having six weeks off of maternity leave. And I had to pay back 2 of those weeks to having what I call my attending baby, my youngest, who's now 4.5, where I worked very little. I was doing what we call like locums or temporary work. I didn't want to sign a contract or sign with a hospital until I had delivered, because I just kind of wasn't sure where things were going to land. And I stopped working at 35 weeks, and I took 3.5 months off. Whereas with my first, I worked that day that I gave birth.
Wow.
And so they were very different experiences, and they're both very different kids. And I'm not quite sure if that's why, but, and so now I'm still working. I work as an OB hospitalist. So I work just in labor and delivery. I work, 12-hour shifts. So that means I don't, I know when I work, I'm not having to go in for emergencies or staying late for the most part. And my husband works as a general pediatrician in private practice, and he works 3 days a week. And I fit my shifts in around his. And so I have found that working part-time, so coming from the girl who was never going to do anything but works part-time. And as my kids have gotten older, I've ramped that up to a point that I feel comfortable with. And it's a life. If you had asked me 10 years ago if that's what my life would be, I would have said absolutely not. That's, because you know everything and you know exactly what your life's going to look at. So yeah, that's my life in a nutshell right now.
So do you think that, like, did you ever envision that, like, being a doctor, it was going to be impossible for you to have a family? Or were you just from the beginning, like early days, like, I don't really know if I want a family?
I think, growing up, my mom was 19 when she had me and my dad was 20, and they were, I'm the first person in my family to go to college and do anything, beyond college. They didn't graduate from high school. They had a very, our life was hard. We were financially challenged. They worked at some point, they had 4 jobs between them so that I could go to a private school. And it was always about education, education. Jen, don't screw up. Don't be like us. Don't have kids. They were like, you see us, we're total mess ups. And I was like, but you're my parents. And
Yeah.
But so in my head, it was drilled in from a very early age that it was all about education and about doing a job that you love. And kids, you don't have to have kids to be successful. So it was like the total opposite of what I feel most girls are told, which is, when are you going to give me babies and grandbabies? And it was the complete opposite. Every time I brought, I would date a guy, they're like, don't you dare, go off track. And my now husband, so we met in medical school. I was already on the path to like doing what I think was pretty good.
Yeah.
And they met him and they're like, well, don't drop out of medical school for him. And I'm like, but he's in medical school. Why would I ever do that? Like, they were so petrified. So I think a lot of it was that fear almost. And I totally understand why they did it. They had the total opposite life and they didn't want that for me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we laugh about it now, I've got 2 kids and they love, and we joke, we're like, yes, my downbeat husband here, you guys were so worried about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh man, that's funny. I get it though, because even the picture that's painted, I would say even today for girls, is like, if you have a baby, that's it. It's not like you have a baby and you have a career. I mean, I know there's this really big movement of like women can have whatever they want and they can have both, but I still think that there's a lot of fear and uncertainty of like, well, what am I sacrificing then? Like, I can have both for sure, but like, what happens?
Right.
So I totally get that. I think that's a very valid concern that your parents had of like, wait a second, we started young, or we weren't able to do the things we wanted to do. And then secondly, them being like, look at you, you have this crazy shot, don't mess it up.
Yeah, don't screw it up, Jen. It's like, okay, I won't. So, but at some point you have to realize I'm going to be okay.
Yes, exactly. I'm sure they know that now.
I think so. I hope so.
That's
good. No, they do.
So here you are pregnant. Are you like terrible? Like, are you bringing back to those thoughts of like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? I'm in my last year of residency.
Yeah. So, it was one of those things. That's my personality. And maybe that's why I'm in a surgical field. Like, once I decide something, like, that's it. And I know it and I've committed. And so it wasn't that I was at all worried. I would say the hardest thing for both my husband and I was, we know too much. We know, and we see all the things that could go wrong. And we see all the complications of pregnancy. We see the preterm births. I would say that when I was pregnant around that periviable time, so that's the time when sometimes babies survive, sometimes they don't, or they do with complications, like that 23, 24, 25 weeks of pregnancy. That was the scariest time, and I'm working on labor and delivery, and I'm delivering babies that are as far along as I am. And and so I just kept thinking like, oh gosh, just get to 30 weeks, just get to 32 weeks, just get to, and so for both pregnancies, once we got past like the 32-week mark, we felt less stressed. But I think when you know too much, it could be really scary. And it was helpful that I was also around, our friends. We were in the exact same position. So I didn't feel like I was doing this alone and I was crazy. I could talk to people about it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It can be scary. I will say my husband and I have always decided like one and done. That's always been our thing. Like, we just want one. We want to we believe in like the ratio power of 2 against 1. And
Yes.
that's just kind of where our ship sails. But as
Yeah.
I've, gone through the stages of motherhood, and I've been like, well, maybe I do want to. And like, what's the impact of like just being an only child? Anyways, now that I've done this podcast and we've interviewed these phenomenal moms with all these different experiences, his number one thing is like, no, like now I know too much. I couldn't like for him, he's like, I can't, if you got pregnant, I can't do it. I can't lose you.
Yeah.
I can't, I can't do this alone. And so I almost feel fortunate that I didn't know some of these stories before I went in, because I do wonder what type of stress that would have put on me or my baby, thinking about all these things that could happen.
Yeah. Ignorance can be bliss. And it was the same thing with my mother. She said, okay, so you had one, you got through the pregnancy. You're not going to have another kid, are you? Because I'm an only child too. And so she was like, one's plenty. And for a while, I didn't know. And then, we decided to have a second. And then when I texted her a picture of him and I called her, she said, please tell me this is it. Like, I can't, I'm so nervous. And, you're my daughter. I said, yes, Mom, we're done. Like, she's like, thank God.
Yeah.
So I get it. I totally get it.
It is hard. Yeah. So did you like growing up as an only child? Now this is going to be my opportunity to understand if I'm making the right decision.
I loved growing up as an only child, but I feel like my opinion has changed more recently. But I can tell you, I loved having the house to myself. I loved it being quiet. I loved that I could read a book. I loved that on Christmas morning, there wasn't me and a brother or sister fighting over like who gets which present. And so it's hard for me. So now not only am I a mom of 2, but I'm a mom of 2 boys, and they are so different than girls. And I know we can say that girls, of course, they can have whatever job and do anything as good or maybe better than a guy, but like the biology is different. Like when you look at boys and girls at a park, like it's not bad, it's just different.
Yeah.
And so I've got these crazy loud boys, and thankfully my husband had a brother, so I can say to him, this can't be normal. Like this level, this is not. And he's like, no, Jen, this is. And so, it's crazy. And that even reinforces like why I was so glad to be an only child. But then I see the 2 of them. It is adorable to watch my 9-year-old teach my 4.5-year-old, and my 4.5-year-old thinks that he is God, like on earth. Like sweet. He is just, if I can't get him to do something, I'll just say, Henry, can you just get your brother to, can you, and he'll say it, and oh yeah, of course he'll do it. So, and I think down the road, especially, as my parents are getting older, I think what I'll need to do and not have a brother or sister to lean on.
Yeah.
That kind of makes me a little, like, I wish I could just have somebody to call and say, Mom is driving me nuts. But, what I tell people, because I see the same thing, women who are like, I only had one and I feel so guilty, or I have 2. It doesn't matter. They're going to be fine. They're going to be fine as long as it's what was right for your family. It's going to be just fine. You decide what's right for you. And it'll work out, like as long as you're doing your job. Yeah.
Even if I had the greatest desire to do all those things you just described or to witness them, I don't think I could go back to that newborn phase. Like I just,
that was the hardest part.
I don't think I could do it.
So I loved having the gap that we did. Like we did that purposefully. We wanted 4.5 years apart, or not exactly, but we wanted the kids to be, I wanted my oldest to be in school. So that way I just could not do 2 under 2, or like I would be running away. I'd be the lady that they're like, where did that mother go? That would be me. But the hardest thing was going back to the newborn stage after having a kid who was independent. And now that's how I know I'm done, because I look at babies and I'm like, you're adorable. And I'm going to give you back now. Like, and I'm giving away every time, like my youngest grows out of clothes, like they're barely off of him. I'm like, let's donate them. Like we're giving that away. And so I think that's how you know when you're done, when you're happily throwing, like, you're like, here, take it away.
Yes. That's so funny. I love, well, just in general, I love to purge, which is, there's a lot of things brought up between my husband with that, because he's not like that. But yes, the second Grayson grows out of something, I'm like, cool, can I sell it? Can I get rid of it? Like, what can I do to not have this in my house anymore? So
Absolutely.
I feel you on the like purging of the things for sure.
Yep.
I'm always trying to get rid of toys, and Dustin's like, I think he's still playing with that. And I'm like, no, it's fine. He doesn't even know it's here. And I don't know why I need to get rid of it, but I do.
I love it. It's like the control over the uncontrollable. And you're like, okay, I can do this. It's simpler now.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Oh, well, I'm pretty confident I'm okay with just the one. We'll see. Maybe at 4 years I'll change my mind, but I don't know if I could do it. just
You're like,
don't
now I have to buy
know.
all this new stuff. No. And
Yeah.
you know what? It doesn't even matter if you keep it because it's useless. Because in 4 years, all the rules change. Everything's different. You're not supposed to do this. And then you are. And that's
Yes.
expired. And so it doesn't even matter if you keep it because
Yeah.
it's all useless.
I'm going to say a miracle would have to happen for us to have another baby.
Yeah.
It's just not really in the cards for us.
Yeah, nope, that is
see.
just fine. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. We'll see. My husband's an only child, so but I come from a big family, so I also understand the terribleness of that Christmas morning with the siblings, but also like the beauty of what that brings and what that brings later on in life. I just also don't know if I'm willing to do it again. For me, selfishly, like I'm like, I don't know if I could do newborns and sleepless nights
and you give
and
up
breastfeeding.
so much. I mean, your body, you're like, it's, I mean, I loved being pregnant. I loved breastfeeding, but I also love that it's my body now and I can go away to a conference or I don't have to worry. I don't live my life in 3-hour increments anymore. And I loved it when I did it. But I'm also like, that's when like you're past that stage now. Like I look back at that fondly and I would not want that right now.
Yes. Oh, I totally hear you on that. Okay. So after you had your first, you said you took 6 weeks off and then you went right back to work.
Yes. And it was really hard. It was just super hard because I went back to residency hours. I mean, sometimes 24 hours, a little bit longer away. And it was in, January, which in the Pacific Northwest is like the saddest time of the year. Yes. So it's dark and it's bleak and and before I even had my oldest, I knew about breastfeeding, right? Because I was trained. I knew it was great and wonderful. And my husband knew it was great. And I was like, yeah, I'll give it a whirl, but my life's really busy. And I don't see how that's going to work for me. And I loved it. And it was like those 6 weeks of nursing. I mean, we had our challenges, but it was my favorite thing. And to then have to replace that with a pump. I mean, I would come home with bottles and imagine being away for 24 hours and just coming home with like a gallon of milk and having to be hooked up to this pump. And it was so horrible. And just being a resident, you're not in control of your life. Most people in my program were very supportive, but some were not. And the ones that were not were vocal and made it really hard.
Vocal, and also like how?
Like they found it very, they did not think it was right that a resident would have to say leave the operating room to go pump or, that patient care might be compromised. Yeah. Even though I went to I know it was ridiculous. And I think, things are getting better, but unfortunately this is the way of the world still. And so even though I went out of my way to make sure that nothing ever went uncovered, I came into work, ridiculously early so that I would get my work done. I always had another person step in. Like there was never any compromising in any sort of care. What I love is that the chair of my department, when he was notified of this, he was like, well, of course I support her. She's doing exactly what she should be. So he went to bat. But it just was this terrible feeling that these people were talking about me. They're talking about my breasts. We're supposed to be in women's healthcare. These are obstetricians, right? Like this is what we do. And you are coming down hard on me for something that we're telling our patients to do. So I spent the last 6 months of my residency very angry because you have this pull to your child and you're having to leave them for an extended period of time. And I'm sleep deprived and I'm pumping. And I just felt like, oh my God, is this ever going to end? And then it did. And that was great. And we had the summer and I didn't start my work until the fall. So we took the summer to move and get relocated after residency to take our first grown-up jobs, which was awesome. And it was you think you know what you're going to do, right? Like I'm not going to have kids or I'm going to breastfeed for 6 weeks and be done. And there I was, and he was almost 2 years old and we were still nursing. And it was my favorite part of parenting because it was the thing that I could do in the middle of the night when I was actually home and not at work. But it was hard. It was super hard to be delivering other women's babies and not be able to be with mine. And of course I love doing that. I mean, that's my whole life, but to see that as, I haven't seen my baby for 20 hours and here I am in a delivery and I'm leaking and because the baby's crying and
oh yeah. Oh God.
It's just where I'd start to pump and we'd have to run to a C-section. And it was just you're like, is this really my life? And so that's why with my next, I was like, I'm not doing that again. Like I am not working up until the day that I deliver and I'm not going back and worrying about, is everything perfect? And In 6 weeks, I have to have everything figured out in the freezer, ready to go. And it was
Yeah.
just, it was nice to be able to do that. But not everybody has that choice. And that's so
Mm-mm.
sad in this country. I mean, we treat
Yeah.
women so terribly when it comes to motherhood and maternity leave, paternity leave. We're so backwards in the United States when it comes to that.
Yes, we are. Yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
idea of like just even for any job, like you pushed a human, okay, whatever. You push
Hmm.
out of your vagina, you got to cut out of your stomach, like whatever it is
Right.
that
Yeah.
happened. Like there is something to recover from that. And if
Oh,
there is
yeah.
data saying that 1 in 7 women
Hmm.
experience some sort of postpartum depression or anxiety, like maybe
Oh, yeah.
you should give these women some more time off without them having to be like, hey, I'm also experiencing this, so I don't know if I can come back to work. If they're comfortable
Right.
enough even saying that. Like,
Right. Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
just
and
so
for
crazy.
me, it was, I only had a certain amount of time that I could take off or I wouldn't be able to finish my program.
Right.
And so I had to stay an extra 2 weeks and, do whatever. And it was fine. But it was just, I remember, yeah, my first 2 weeks of maternity leave were great. And then once I hit that 2 weeks, I was like, okay, I've got 4 weeks left. I have to get everything figured out. We have to get a nanny. We have to make sure that we're pumping. I have to make sure that you had to figure everything out. And, it's just ridiculous. So now when I had my second and I remember I hit that 6 week mark, it was so different because I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not worrying about,
Yeah.
I feel like you don't even really start to have a clue until like 3 months. Like
Yes.
that's like when maybe the sun starts to shine a little bit more and
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah.
So to force women back to work before that, and I'm lucky, right? There are women in this country who go back 1 week, 2 weeks afterwards because they have to eat. They're going to lose their job or their house. Like that to me, it's insane. Like they're barely discharged from the hospital and they're going back to work. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I was so fortunate that the company I was working for had put in like a leave, a parental leave and a maternity leave that was going to go in
Hmm.
effect the following year. So Grayson was born August 2017 and this was going to happen in 2018. And so they retroactive it for
Oh,
me
that's so
4 weeks.
nice.
So I had
Nice.
vacation, I had personal. So Grayson was born on the 31st of August and I didn't have to go back to work till January something.
Oh, see,
Um,
and that's, yeah,
and it
so
was
much
beautiful.
better.
And at that time, I mean, there was decisions I had to make. Like I was gonna go back to work, and so we were
Hmm.
gonna get a nanny or do some sort of daycare. And during that time, I think mentally, whether I knew it or not, I made the decision that I was not capable of going back to work. Like there was an
Hmm.
anxiety and a depression that I was feeling that
Yeah.
work was just not going to suit, and nor would being away from Grayson suit. And so I'm so thankful I had that time to really digest that and what that
Yeah.
was, because
Right. Exactly.
I
Yeah.
don't know what my choice would have been.
Yeah, no, and that's what was hard for me is because I didn't have a choice. I had to finish my program. And I mean, I'm so glad I did because I love what I do every day. But in
Yeah.
the midst of it, you're just thinking, like, why can't I get a break? Luckily,
Hmm.
we were able to get a nanny and we kind of had to do that because our hours were so insane. I mean, there were days I'd go into the hospital at 5 o'clock in the morning and my husband would still be at work from the night before. Like,
Wow.
there's no normal daycare that works those hours.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we were lucky we got a nanny and she was phenomenal. Like, I mean, we're still in touch with her. Like she'll come up and she'll watch the kids occasionally. Like last spring, we went to wine country for a night and she came
Hmm.
and stayed with them. Like she was
That's so cool.
such a huge part of me feeling okay leaving my son. But then when we moved to the Northeast and I went back to work and I started out full time now as an attending. So hours are definitely better than when you're a resident, but they're still really hard, especially that first year out where you're just petrified that you're going to screw up. So you're at work so much longer, just making sure
Hmm.
because now you're the one who's in charge. And the nanny we got there, it just wasn't the same.
Yeah.
There wasn't that connection. She wasn't. I mean, she was great. I mean, she kept my child alive and she did everything. I never had a concern, but she was just not like that same person. And so that combined with, I started to get so depressed because I thought, oh my goodness, I just got through residency. Here we go. I made it. And here I am back in it again. And now there's no time frame, right? There's no end. This is just my life. And
Yeah.
I love my work, but I can't do this full time and be the kind of mom that I want to be. And I'm not saying that people can't. It just wasn't working for me.
Yeah.
And so at the end of that year, I had this nauseating conversation with my boss and said, I have to cut back or I just can't do this. and nauseating because I'm a typical woman who doesn't like to, make people feel bad. And then especially as a younger attending in medicine, and you work so hard, and remember where I came from was I'm never going to have kids, to now I'm working part-time because of my kids. Like, who am I?
Yeah.
And it was the best decision I'd ever made. Like that first day when it went into effect, I was like, my feet were not touching the ground. And I've never looked back, and I've continued to be part-time a bit more than previously, but it's because my kids are older, and it's because like my work brings me joy. And I'm not going to work dreading the time away or feeling guilty. It's the fact that they're working together, and there's no such thing as balance. It's just that today I'm doing this, I'm wearing this hat, tomorrow I'll wear a different hat, but I've got enough time to be able to do both and not feel pulled in too many directions. And if you are, like, you're never going to be happy. And it's so sad in this country. So many women have to go back to work or have to do things, and because childcare is so ridiculously expensive. And
oh my gosh, I remember there was this place we were looking at, and I mean, again, we're both very fortunate and made good money with our company that we had all both worked at for many years. And I mean, there was this childcare that was like, I don't know, they did like retina scans to make sure your child were safe. Like you walked into the door with like, I'm talking like $2,500 a month. I was like, okay, we don't make that good of money. Like, what is this? This is a lot of money to pay. And it was like teaching childhood science to your 6-week-old. And I was like, there's a part of me that's just like, okay, can you make sure that they're fed? Can I see them on a camera? Cause I'm obsessed. And can you just make sure they're alive and held? Like, that's it. But like, I don't need them to learn science. How much can you deduct if you don't take them to that class? Like, I don't know. It's just so expensive.
You're just working to pay the daycare. And so for so many moms, they want to work, but they end up staying home because they're like, well, everything is going to daycare.
Yeah.
If there's lots of things we could do better in this country, but if we could do some sort of universal daycare, preschool, I mean, like they do in France, like they do in other places. If you can't give women a year off, help them stay. They want to work. And if we do this, they are going to stay in the workforce longer. If that's what they want to do, they're not going to feel like they have to quit. If that's not what they truly want to do, they shouldn't be forced to financially.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, like, I wish I had that like autonomy to be able to make a decision like that, because I would have loved to figure out like what worked well for me with work. And I mean, that's something that I think a lot of women want. It just is that in our world, or I guess in my world, it was like one or the other. Like I had to work full time, and my full-time job required me to travel. And so that would be weeks and states away, and all these scary things. And so it's just crazy.
Yeah. And workplaces need to be more flexible. I mean, it's, in this day and age, why are we requiring people to be in an office from 9 to 5 when we can do so many things remotely, or we can share positions? I mean, we need to be more creative, because face it, women are now, in the workforce en masse, and you can't have the same setup that you did back in 1940 when it was all men. Like, it just doesn't work.
Well, and I will tell you that I had a boss who told me once, and I don't know if this was like exactly what he was saying, but I take it as this now. But he was saying to me, like, once you become a mom, it's going to change for you. Like, when things would happen, he'd be like, because I was pregnant, or he knew I was going to become a mom, or I was asking him questions or whatever. Nothing inappropriate, but he was like, you're going to change. Like, your mindset's going to change. Your whatever's going to change. It's going to be better. And I always thought, whatever, you're a guy. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But I'm not kidding you. Businesses would be silly not to invest in moms. Like, the things I have learned as a mom, the patience, the skills, the communication skills I've picked up, like the ability to like relate to other people, the compassion I have, that stuff has skyrocketed since being a mom. Like, you are missing out. Yes, multitasking. Like, being able to be less, not less sensitive, because I appreciate my sensitive side, but like being able to understand when something happens, like how to not react right away. Like, these things that as a previous leader in a business, I didn't do well. And I can see now as a mom, I could be a way bigger benefit to them now.
Oh yeah.
Knowing that, and knowing that I have something like to do it for, and to do it because, and I just think, man, you'd be silly as a business not to want to employ lots of moms, and also give them the flexibility that they need to be a mom.
I totally agree.
Because you're missing out. Like, moms are cool.
Yeah.
We get crap done. We
just
get
get
it
stuff done in half the time, and
Yeah. Well, we've got stuff to do. We
Yeah.
can't waste our time on other stuff for sure.
Exactly.
Oh man. Okay, so I do have one last question, or one more
Mm-hmm.
question. Not one
Yeah.
last question. Okay, so you had mentioned having this conversation with your boss of like, I need to step down.
Mm-hmm.
Being only educated by Grey's Anatomy, I don't understand. So when you say that, like in a normal job, like if I worked at a bank and I said I need to be
Mm-hmm.
part-time,
Mm-hmm.
in my experience, it would only work if they had a part-time position available. So in a
Right.
hospital, being a resident or being an attendee, do you
Mm-hmm.
just get to decide, or how does that work?
No, yeah, that's a great question. And so no, I mean, he could have very well said, we are only going to employ you. You have to be full time to make it worth our while. So he could have totally said that, and then I would have said, okay, I need to go elsewhere, and I'll figure things out. So it really just depends on the job. And so what I ended up doing was working on labor and delivery only. So I gave up my clinic practice, and I did shifts on labor and delivery. And I think for him, he was smart. He said, well, we can lose her completely, or she can work on labor and delivery, and then we can shuffle around people in the office. But he could have totally said, no, I'm sorry. Then, you work through your contract and that's it. So I think it was luck and flexibility, and not all practices are going to be like that. And it's different if you're in private practice, because if I would have to cover my overhead. How much I work is how much I take home. And if I'm not working enough to cover the overhead, then I can't keep doing that. So it's just very individualized for sure.
Okay. That's so crazy. Well, I'm glad that they were able to see the benefit in that, because
Oh yes.
now we're here today and we get to hear
Exactly.
you on your expert interview and hear your mom's story. So I'm glad
And I'll
they did
tell
that.
you, I was at the lowest point then. I was thinking, why did I go into medicine? Why did I lock myself into this? And now, thankfully, I've stuck with it, and it's a field where you can have flexibility. And I realize I'm very privileged in that way, that I'm able to do things that somebody who does not have that same flexibility, it just can't do. So I'm beyond grateful. But yeah, in the thick of it, I thought, I'm just not even going to practice medicine, because if I can't do it my way, I can't. When you get into that mode, you're so down and you just can't see the end of the tunnel, that you're like, that's it. I can't. And I want to be with my, I want to have that pull, which again, I never thought I would have, but I was like, I want to be home more. And now maybe as my kids are older, I'm like, you know what? I love work because I get to talk to adults, and I get to finish that cup of coffee. And then I come home and I'm renewed. But then when I work too many shifts in a row, I'm like, no, I need to go home. So it's, it's never perfect, but,
no,
but
I get
what
that.
works for you.
Yes.
You find what works for you. And there's no one answer. And I hate the idea, the mom wars of stay-at-home moms, care more, or working moms, or giving their kids a better example. It's just crap. It's whatever works for you. Because if you're not happy, it doesn't matter what you're doing, because your kids are going to see that.
Yes. So. Well, and I would love to have like a panel of moms and like interview them like for the podcast, and then like at the end disclose who's a stay-at-home mom and who's a working mom, because I would agree through and through that everybody is the same and everybody is a working mom. It's just that like society says you have this title or you don't, right? It's like, and that's what's really hard for me. That was a big thing for me when I first left what I thought was like this company that really valued me, and I was a really big head honcho and was working my way up, and I was going to be a manager, and like all these things were really like looking good for me. And then I watched as I got pregnant, and then these talks of like me coming back, and I didn't really understand like why people would ask that, and of course I'm coming back, and also how that conversation's pretty like not appropriate, and it's not really any of your business, and I'll just decide what I want. I didn't really understand where I feel like, again, as a mom, my mindset has changed, and I would have that conversation very differently today. But at the end of the day, when I decided to stay home, I for sure dealt with this like societal shift where when people asked me what I did, even today, when people ask me what I do, I always say, oh, I'm just a mom. I'm just a mom. And that is the worst. I hate when people say it. I hate when I say it. It's the worst because you're not just
Yeah.
a mom. Like, first off, you are a mom.
Right.
And that's a hard job. And there's also a lot of other things we do, but it's just so hard to articulate that because we don't have this like check in, check out. And I think it's valuable as stay-at-home moms and working moms to kind of talk through that, to give some perspective of like what that feels like.
Yeah. And when I was that first year when I cut back and when I was part-time in that practice, and I worked with a lot of, just older men. And they kept saying things to me like, I can't believe you've cut back so early in your career. Like, aren't you going to miss it? Don't you hate that you're giving this up? And I would always answer when people would say, oh, are you working? I'd say, yeah, but I'm just part-time. And it was the same thing, just. And that was super hard for me because I felt like I didn't fit in any world. I wasn't at work enough. So they didn't see me as valuable enough to be there full-time. And then I wasn't even totally stay at home. So I couldn't even do all the stuff. I'd have to like patch together sitters and all this stuff. And then I'd miss something and somebody would be sick. And so I was still screwing up at the stay-at-home mom thing. And it took me a couple of years to own it and feel like, yeah, I am part-time and it's perfect for me. And some of my colleagues are full-time and it's perfect for them. And I see it a lot at work, when we're making small talk during, in between contractions, you talk about whatever. And so we're talking and I say, oh, what do you do? Or blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, well, I just stay home. And I stop and then I'm like, listen, I was like, this baby's about to come out and you're going to like keep it alive and feed it. And you're going to do amazing things. And at the end of the day, let's be real. You can't clock out. You can't hand off the pager. You can't they are little dictators. And
yes, they are.
Like this is the hardest thing you're ever going to do. It's like, I don't want to scare you. You're about to give birth, but like,
there's a lot of other scarier things.
Don't ever just that, because I can tell you doing both, there are days where my doctor job is really hard, but there are more days where my mom job is way, way harder. And it's because we are not supported, we're not respected, or it's just harder. It's not a normal job. We are a mom, we are household managers, we are chefs, we are chauffeurs, we are educators, we are de-escalation experts. We do it all.
Yes, or we're trying to be
right.
We're still trying to read the articles and figure out how to do it.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I just think
hard.
the biggest thing is that we are the most like resourceful people that I know. And feel lucky to be a part of that group. And it's hard because I also know a lot of people who are trying to be moms. And so I try to be really sensitive to that too, because I don't ever want to say, yes, motherhood is hard, but there are things that can be harder in motherhood. There's things that can be harder just trying to get to motherhood. So I get that. But yes, I would agree that there's like this stigma that's put on working moms or non-working moms or whatever that become, it's like this divider between us where we don't articulate well, like what we mean or ask the right question. And I don't know, where we feel like an imposter, like I'll say things like, gosh, I'm so tired and I'm so busy. And my best friend who does cancer research and has 2 kids is like, yeah, I know it's tiring. And I'm thinking in my mind like, okay, well, wait, I have no room to talk because you have 2 babies and you work full time doing work that's like really hard and emotional. And it's just like,
but no.
Yes.
It's not comparative at all. It's just, and it's so hard in this day and age where you can see everything online and social media. And, but you don't know the struggles. And like you said, you don't know who's out there trying to have a baby and who wishes they were right where you are. And you feel like you're not good enough, but you're somebody else's like epitome of what exactly they want. And I hope that it changes, as I feel like our generation, my kids, like the things that they'll say, like, we'll just say, oh yeah, and so-and-so, yeah, she has 2 dads, like obviously mom. And like, doesn't even bat an eye. Like that's not even a weird or like a different or not the norm. Like, yes, of course. And so when they're like, yeah, her mom works here or her mom stays at home, like they don't even bat an eye. And I'm hoping I hope to God, like this is the generation that finally is like, who cares? Like, we get it. Whatever.
Just be who you are.
Your thing.
Do your thing. Who cares? Yeah, exactly. Gosh, I would wish and I hope. And man, that would be a day I'd love to see for sure. Yes. That's a hard thing for me because I for sure am like, I'm confused why we care about this. Like, wait a second. Who cares if you work or you don't work or you believe that or he just said this? Like,
I know.
Where did this all come in from? Like, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to take a shower, you guys. Like, I'm just trying to like look decent before I get out of the house because I wrestled with a 2-year-old for 3 hours and
right. Exactly. Yep.
one
Yep,
armpit shaved and one's not. Like, that's what I'm trying to focus on.
Yeah. Or like, is the dishwasher dirty? Like, how dirty is it? Like, can we use these dishes again?
Yes.
I know.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Yep.
Okay, what has been the most, like, I would say, I'll do 2-part question. So what's been the most rewarding thing about being 2 parents in the medical field, and then like the scariest thing about being 2 parents in the medical field?
Yeah. So the most rewarding, I'm not even going to lie about it. It's that we can get appointments. So we have had some medical needs with our kids, and if we have been outside of the system, we would have to wait months. We would have to, go to people we don't want to. But because we have friends who, they're this doctor or they know this, or we know how to schedule this, we've been able to do that. And that has been amazing. But it has also really angered me because when I haven't had those connections and I've had to go through the system like anybody else, I sit there and I'm like, no wonder everybody hates doctors and the system is broken. And I don't know how I would function. And yet that's how everybody has to function. And it's not fair. It's not fair at all. And so what has at least given me some hope is that my husband in his private practice, he has been able to say, here's how we need to make this easier for parents. Like, we had to do this and parents shouldn't have to do that. So I feel like we're not totally selfish and just basking in the fact that when my kid needed to get into an allergist after an anaphylactic reaction, we could do it in a day as opposed to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
We're able to try to make some change. So, I'm trying to feel like, okay, at least this is good because we can try to change this.
Well, I say take advantage of that. For me personally, like I feel like if I had an in like that, that's your right. You also went to medical school and did residency and was pregnant. It's like you kind of earned your right to be like, I get first dibs on this, okay,
right?
guys?
Like, I gave up my 20s and we're 6 figures in debt. Can I please just be seen tomorrow?
Yeah.
No, I will, and I'm thankful. I never take it for granted. But and I will also say, having to navigate our parents through some healthcare situations too, it's opened my eyes, like, oh my gosh, about why people hate this healthcare system. And I agree 100%. And I do not get angry when people are angry at me because, I called in 12 times. I'm like, I get it. Like, I totally get it.
Yeah.
And I would say the most challenging thing for us is when we know the stuff and, it could be a common cold or it's measles. Like, we have a hard time stepping back. But I do think what we're good at is we're not our children's doctors. We still take our kids to a pediatrician. We still, people have asked us, why do you do that? You can be your kid's doctor. Like, what? That's not fair to us or to them.
Yeah.
Because, when it's your kid, you're never objective, right? It's the worst case scenario. It's and I love having a doctor who I can unload on and I can say, I don't want you to talk to me in medical terms. Please talk to me as a mom. And that's the pediatrician that we have and that we've stuck with because she's like, Jen, I'm going to talk to you like anybody else. I'm like, great, because I don't know what you're talking about. So my older son wears bifocals and he has a accommodative esotropia and astigmatism. And I don't even know what all those words mean, except his eyes are really bad. And we have to go to the ophthalmologist like every 6 months. I have no clue what she's talking about, but she's a fellow mom doc in one of our online groups. So I'm like, talk to me like you don't even know anything because I don't know what you're saying. And it's great because I feel like, we've been with people before who have not acknowledged that. And when I'm in the office, I just want to be a mom. And my husband just wants to be a dad, even though he's a pediatrician. He just wants to be the dad. And he wants to say, just hear me out and be told to be reassured. And that has taught me that sometimes your words and just reassuring people, can go very far. So yeah, for sure. The hardest things are seeing the scary stuff, the stuff I see at work, the stuff that we've done in our training. We have seen the worst of it. And sometimes, the stuff that you see on TV, sometimes you just come home and you hug your kids and you're just so thankful that you have them because not everybody is lucky to get through life unscathed. It's so hard. And I think that's hard too, having then had a kid and then have to be the OBGYN who has to deliver the bad news or have that outcome. As a mom, And I'm not saying you have to be a mom to be a good doctor, but certainly it's added that next level of I can totally sit here and cry with you because I'm feeling all these feelings too right now.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Oh, that
Yeah.
that right there. I don't even know how
Yeah.
you do that. Do they train you on that kind of stuff in school, or is that just
Not
stuff?
well. No,
Yeah,
not
I would
well.
assume not.
No, the
Okay.
first time I had to pronounce a patient dead was this young woman. She had died from ovarian cancer, and she had 2 kids who were young. And I'd never done this before. Nobody told me how to do it. And I asked the nurse, I said, what do I do? And she's like, well, you just go in there and, their heart's not beating and you just take a time. And I was like, I feel like I could use some guidance here.
Yeah.
And I walked out of that room and I just went into the medication room and I bawled. And, nurses are coming in and out and they're like, it gets easier. And I'm like, I don't think it does.
Well, and like it shouldn't. Like I don't.
And it shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've gotten better at it, but it's
Mhm.
not gotten easier. But I think we are getting better at training doctors when it comes to that sort of things. But when I went through it, I just, you just did it. And that was really hard because you go home and you're like, what the hell just happened? Because after
Yeah.
that, then you have to go deliver a baby and put on your smiley face. And
Oh,
this is this family's best moment. I have to be there for them. And that's part of the training. I think just, you have to be present. Because you can't let good outcomes or bad outcomes, skew you. You have to try to stay objective, but you're also human, right? Like, and that's where you have to come home and unload or find a healthy outlet because physician suicide rates are ridiculously high.
oh, really?
Yeah, and women in the general population, men, they commit more suicide and they are successful more frequently. So they try it and they do it. Whereas women in general try it and they're not successful. But female physicians, we are more successful at completing suicide than male physicians. And I say it's just because we have to be perfect at everything. And so we bear it harder, I think. And so there's a lot more awareness, I think, to the toll that things are taking, but we still have a ways to go.
Wow.
For sure. But I like that I'm married to a physician because he can understand when I'm like, I need to talk about this or I can't talk about it.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
nice.
sure
And then
that helps.
and then I'm thankful for my kids where we just had a really difficult day just a few weeks ago. And the next day came home, my kids were in school and I was like, oh God, this house is empty and I'm replaying things. And then I got called to pick up my youngest because he had a fever. And I was just so thankful because it's all about them, right? The kids, like they keep you in the moment. And so I had him to just keep me grounded and just, be like, Mom, I need my mom today. I don't think about that stuff. I need you. And
yeah.
So yeah.
Man, it's,
Mhm.
I really hope that there is like a decompression class or something
Mhm.
that helps doctors. Cause I just can't even fathom.
Yeah. They're getting
what
there
that's
and
like.
they're doing more with mental health and following
I
up
really
and
hope
debriefs
so.
and
Yeah.
but there's still a ways to go. But I think it's changing too because now women are now in the medical field more. We are, what I think it's 50% of doctors and 60% of medical students. So as more females come through, I think we tend to be more in tune with that, and so we are changing
Yeah.
that, and we're saying, hey, it's okay to talk about this at work. It's not a sign of weakness to say, I need a couple days because I'm really distressed, or
Yeah.
as opposed to, well, you just go in and listen and if there's no heartbeat, you just go sign the paperwork. Like that's all you need to do. I'm like, oh.
I mean, I just
So,
can't even.
yeah.
Oh, that sounds
Yeah.
awful. That's why
But,
I used to really be like, oh, I had a bad day at work. And then I'd talk to my friend and she'd be like, well, I, had to tell a patient that the, test last chance drug isn't going to work. And that's just kind of the end. And I was like, okay, well, I didn't have that bad of a day at work.
yeah.
Like, perspective
I
is a
know.
really good medicine as well.
I know. But see, and that's why I could never be a pediatrician because thankfully in my neck of the woods, things most of the time go right and patients are healthy. But in pediatrics, I could not care for kids with cancer. I just couldn't because kids
Yeah.
are innocent. I don't care. Kids, I just couldn't do that at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure it's terrifying. The reason why I asked I was interested to know if that was one of your fears of like, all these things that can happen. And so because I'm a hypochondriac, just naturally. Like
Yeah.
I remember I just went to the doctor recently and I was like, I get this really bad pain. Like it could be like an ovarian cyst and it could be all this stuff. My doctor's like, you're just ovulating and that's just
Right.
like what happens. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
fine. But every time I'm like, this could be a cyst and I could be like
Right.
all these feelings. Anyways,
Of course.
but with Grayson, it's like times 10
Oh, yeah.
because when he gets
Yep.
sick, I'm like, oh my gosh, is this going to be
Mhm.
some thing that's going to come and it's this virus that's been around. So I really
Right.
try. I actually believe ignorance is bliss
Oh, it
in
is.
that
It
place.
is, yeah.
Like I hear about
Mhm.
things, even just recently, there's this terrible disease that's going around. It's brought in from China. One of the
Oh,
cases is
yes.
just
Yeah, the
miles away from
coronavirus.
us.
Yeah. I know. Great, right?
And they traveled through the SeaTac airport. And so we were on the
Mhm.
ferry the other day and I was like, oh my gosh, people go to the airport and then they get on the ferry. And I'm just like, and so I'm like, you know what? I'd better off just not know. Like,
Yep. I
because
know.
guess
I
what?
know.
What am I going to do other than
Right.
keep him as clean as I can, just like I do every other day? Like,
Right. Yeah. And for
however,
us, oh no, go ahead. Yeah.
oh, okay, just quickly, he did get sick right when we moved into this house. So of course I'm like, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, this house must have something in its walls or in the carpet. Like I'm like, oh, it
Exactly,
couldn't
yeah.
just be that it's November and everybody
I
gets
know.
sick and he's
I know.
tired and whatever.
No.
But I took
It's
him,
that worst case scenario, you know?
yeah. Well, and worst case, I took him to Seattle Children's and
Uh-huh.
they are a wonderful hospital and I'm very thankful
Mhm.
for what they've done. But this doctor or nurse, I'm not quite sure, to be honest,
Mhm.
came in and they were
Mhm.
great. And we hadn't given our son the flu shot. And that's just
Mhm.
something I have always had a really hard time. My body's always had a really hard time processing the flu shot. So it
Mhm.
makes me nervous to give it to him at
Mhm.
such a young age. Anyways, so I've always had all these questions. I've talked to my doctor about it, whatever. But so she's like, did you have the flu shot? And I said, no. And so she's kind of like, well, it's too late to test for the flu, but I can. And this is how we do it. And I was like, that sounds
Mhm.
awful because why would I
Yes,
put
it
my
is
child
awful.
through that?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, could it be anything else? He's had a fever for like 4 days or 5 days and he's just not getting better. And it's
Mhm.
just worse and worse. And then this beautiful woman decides to tell me like 3 things that it could be. And I am like, wait a second. I don't know if I want to know that. And then she's talking
Right.
about like cases she's seen that night. And then I'm like, did you shout? Did you wash your hands before you came
Right,
in here?
exactly.
Like, obviously, all
Exactly.
those things are just like me taking the extreme. But
Oh,
that
I
was the
know.
moment that I was like, I don't want to know about this stuff. Like,
Yeah,
sometimes even the
exactly.
moms groups I'm on and they post stuff, I'm like, I don't want to know this exists.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
okay
No.
not knowing that this is in the world.
Yep. Yep. And that's what, so my husband, sometimes he'll be like, okay, well, it could be this, it could be this. I said, stop talking. Tell me what you think it is. And I don't want to hear what like the 2% chance is because I'm going to freak out and I understand what you're doing. But the flip side of that is, you know, when our kids would get fevers and there's certain things that you can just tell, like roseola or
That was,
parvovirus, like when they
yeah.
get those, you know, the slap cheeks. And so we're like total dorks. We're like, look, the fever curve, and look, his cheeks are all red, and we're high fiving. We're like, we totally called it, and you know, I mean, while our kid's miserable,
Yeah,
and we're like,
that's
you know,
awesome.
I'm like, this is so great. Like, you got your first, you know, parvovirus, and then the roseola was the best because when you know the whole rash, we're like, this is so textbook.
Oh my gosh, that's too funny.
You know, and meanwhile, the preschool teacher is like, should I be worried? It's like, no, it's fine. It's not measles. It's totally fine.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I guess that would be the flip side of it. At least you understand that, like, because as this doctor is describing this to me, I'm like, wait a second. So does he die? Like, what happens? And again, she's like, no, it just goes away. And so I'm like, well, then don't tell me. Like,
Exactly.
I don't want to know if he's fine.
Yep. No, I'm the same way. Yep. And my husband too. I'm like, just tell me how much ibuprofen. That's all I want to know because I can't figure out stupid dose. And I don't care how smart you may think I am. I can't read this bottle. It makes no sense. Like, I don't understand. Or you go to the drugstore and you're like, there's 72 different bottles. I have a medical degree and I have no idea which one is the right one. So how do we expect people who've never had any training, like this is not right. Too many choices.
Well, yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Crazy. Well, and I remember when Grayson was very young and I can't remember, we had gone to the pediatrician so much. Again, I was like in the middle of firing one, trying to find a new one just because it was so awful. And no one would really trust us. Like we were like, he's just not sleeping. I think it's like reflux. Is everything working? But of course they're like, just wait. And I'm like, how about you come to my house and play with this baby while I sleep, and then we can talk about waiting. Like, what do you think?
Yep, exactly.
But one of the nurses, I don't know, had the audacity to tell me that teething is not real and that it's not painful. And
Yeah.
It's just like a myth, and
Mm-hmm.
kids just get fevers and are
Mm-hmm.
just cranky. And so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, what? Like,
Yeah.
don't tell me that. I believe it's
Yeah.
real. And so my husband, unfortunately, was there that day. And so he took the stance of like, well, if the doctor said it, that's what's
Right.
happening.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, people also say PMS isn't real. So, like, let's talk
Right.
about that too. Anyway, but from that point on, my husband's like, we don't really need to give a medicine. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
we need to give a medicine.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
it's
Oh
just
yeah.
this constant battle in our house of like,
Oh, I know. I know.
do you give it?
Well,
Do you not?
I will tell you, my husband too, in residency training, had no kids. There's no data to show that teething causes fevers or causes diarrhea. And then enter our babies who do all of that. And he's like, I was so stupid. I will never tell a parent that ever again. He goes, I am just, he's like, I'm like, duh, I told you this. I didn't need a book. It just give him the ibuprofen. Again, give him the ibuprofen. We're always like, wait, look, did he
Yeah.
look at us the wrong way? Give it to him because then he'll sleep.
Yes.
But
Because
yeah,
sleep is
so
like so crucial.
I know, yeah. So thankfully he was humble to realize, or humble
Oh,
enough to
good.
say, okay, that is bullshit.
I'm so glad. I will
Yeah.
never forget her face. I seriously looked at her
Yeah.
like, I'm sorry. Are you really telling me this right now in
Yeah.
front of this
Yeah.
guy who's going to believe you,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to have to
Mm-hmm.
battle it forever?
Yeah. And then my youngest was the worst spit up. I just like he was a
Oh.
volcano, but was the happiest kid. He's what they call the happy spitter. But just spit up everywhere. Like we probably left more of his DNA all over Portland. Like it's just disgusting. But my husband said, well, it's not a medical problem. It's a laundry problem because it's just a lot of laundry. And so in the middle of the night, when it's like the fourth time I had to change out the sheets because he can't sleep because he's in spit up, I said, if you ever tell a mother it's just a laundry problem, I'm going to find the laundry and I'm going to smother you with it because it is my mental health. It's out the window. And he's like, oh my God, this is terrible. It's like, I told you.
Yes.
I told you.
Yeah.
He's
Yes.
like, I will never say that ever again. I'm like, thank you.
Well, and I don't mean to knock pediatricians, but when I did go in, so I won't go down our whole path, but basically Grayson was experiencing very similar, like a lot of spit up. He couldn't sleep on his back. He had to sleep on my chest. Like, I mean, it was awful. Like 8 weeks, I slept on a couch with
Whoa,
him on my
yeah.
chest, barely trying to figure out breastfeeding, which was not magical for me.
Yeah.
All the things.
Yeah.
And so I finally, this is funny. We had a pediatrician and then we went to the like walk-in version of our doctors thinking we could like get around her and be like, hey, we need this help. And they were like, the doctor came in and was like, so your current pediatrician, it looks like, and I was like, oh no, they found us. Like, we're never going to be able to hide from her. So eventually we got a new doctor, but I remember at this walk-in clinic, I mean, I'm so tired. Grayson had literally puked all over me and in the room and wouldn't breastfeed. I didn't have my nipple shield. Like all this stuff was happening. And the doctor printed out a purple cry. She was like, well, colic, we really want to talk about the purple cry method. And I almost showed her what a purple cry looked like. Because I was like, I'm sorry. What? Like,
Weird.
what is this? I mean, even if it's real, like, it's not helpful for me at this time to really understand the purple cry method.
Right, exactly. And I think that is just the key. Like, I have come to that as a parent and as a doctor. And I know my husband, I mean, I'm kind of annoyed that he's like also the father of my children because I feel like he'd be a really great pediatrician to have too, but we can't use him because, but it's this idea of trusting your gut. And, he says to his patients, and I say to my, like, what is your gut telling you? Because I can tell you what I think's going on, but if you're telling me this isn't right, like we should, and like same thing with me. I know my kid is not right and this is not okay. Or you know what, he's going to be fine. Like we can have all the handouts and all the, well, they're gaining weight and but what about like, what's your gut? Like, what's really going on? Because that is so important. And it's not just to say that doctors don't know anything or that moms don't know anything. It's about like the two finding common ground because there's something when a mom comes into labor and delivery or a patient comes in and she's like, something's not right. I'm like, you're right. It's not like, that's not okay. I can't let you go home and just be like, well, everything's grand. No, you're crazy. Like we have to look into this, like, so.
Well, and it's so important just as a mom or even as a dad, I should say too, to understand that your gut has a relevance. Like, that you should advocate for yourself and you should, even if you don't have a doctor giving you that spiel, like you should also say like, this just isn't working for me.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't know if I learned that early on enough.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully now I have a doctor that's very much so takes that approach of like, well, what do you think? And she's great. But like before, our previous doctor didn't, and I didn't know I could say things like,
Right.
well, no, I want this, or I think this is the best course of action. Instead, I was like, God, I'm lost. Like she doesn't listen to me. She doesn't like me. Like, what did I do wrong? And
no, I get it.
It's terrifying.
Totally get it. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, man, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, like about anything. So
it's super fun.
We might just have to make this be a regular thing.
There we go.
We'll have a medical podcast.
Exactly.
And I'll just give my own non-medical advice.
It's perfect. Listen, it's whatever works. And if the kids are staying asleep while we're doing it, like it's just even better.
Yeah, it's even better. I like that. Okay. Well, one last question then, which is just thinking about like your motherhood journey of having this like medical background, sticking to your guns of like, I want to work, and then understanding what that actually meant for you and all the things you've learned in motherhood. What's your one piece of like mama advice that you have?
Oh, that's so good. I think one would be drink the coffee. Don't let it get cold. That's the first one. My kids know. They're like, Mom hasn't had her coffee yet. But on a serious note, I would say just know things can change and be open to that. Don't ever be so stuck to what you think you're supposed to be doing or what somebody has told you you're supposed to be doing. Because if it doesn't feel right, then it's not right. And don't feel like you have to stick to something because society is going to value you less, or your kids are not going to look up to you, or your husband or your partner expects something of you, or you expect something of you. And I really think it's that internal voice, because we are way worse critics of ourselves than anybody else. I'm guilty of it every day. And I think it's that voice that's making you doubt yourself, or is telling you I'm not happy. Listen to it and address it. And understand that it's okay to change the path if it's not working for you. And you might say every 10 years, oh, I'd never do this. And every 10 years after that you are, and it's exactly where you needed to be. I would say that. And then just one more is self-care. It's so sexy to talk about, but we have to do it. And it's not about the massage or the fancy thing. It's truly finding what works for you and checking in with yourself, because if you are losing it, you can't be there for anybody else. And if that means that you have to say no to something or to people, or say no when your kid asks if you want to play, because it's just going to send you over the edge because you're going to play with them and you're going to get annoyed and you're just thinking about your to-do list, it's okay to say no. Women do not like to say no, again, myself included. But saying no is saying yes to something else. And it's okay to prioritize you, because if you had a daughter, wouldn't you want your daughter when she's a mom to do that? Like, we forget about that. We put ourselves on the bottom rung of the ladder and we let everybody step on us. And that's not okay for us, because we're not going to be around long enough to help our family if we're so depleted. And that's a lesson I'm still learning. So I'm so not perfect at that. So taking time, it's okay to get the babysitter, even if you're just a stay-at-home mom, which you're not just, because it's okay to say, I need to go out for 3 hours, even if it's just to drink coffee. Like, it's okay. Don't feel guilty.
I love that you shared that. I actually recently went to a group, and a women's in business group, which I always feel really out of place in, because I don't feel like that's where I'm at. But I'm like, do we have a women's in passion group? Because I just have a lot of passions.
I love it. Yeah, I love that.
Can I talk here? Anyways, I went to this women's in business group, and this woman gave a phenomenal kind of walkthrough of like this wellness wheel and applies to your business. And she did talk about self-care. And she said something very similar of like, you have to find what's right for you. And it might not be a massage. It might not be this downtime. And it's funny because she said, you know, it might be that you get a cup of tea and you sit on the couch and you read a book with a blanket, and that just might be it. And I thought, gosh, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Like a blanket,
absolutely.
book. And then I was like, wait a second, I don't even like to read. And honestly, if I sat down on the couch with a blanket, I'd rather have Netflix on or be binging on my Netflix.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, wow, I need to stop romanticizing what I think self-care looks like and actually figure out what it does look like for me.
Right. Yeah. For me today, it was my kids were playing peacefully. And I was like, I'm going to clean this closet because I've had this stuff in here and I just want to organize it. And most people say, well, that's not self-care. But for me, that I'm a doer. So that was awesome for me, because that at the end of it, I was like, look at this pile of stuff to donate. Because again, I love to purge just like you.
Yes.
And that, to me, that was self-care. And it was awesome because it was me doing that. And I told my kids, you know what, I'm not going to play yet another round of bug bingo with you because I really am not feeling it. And I don't feel guilty, because when I do say yes to you, you know that I really want to be there. And I think that's an important message to send to kids. Like, it's okay to say no. It's okay to say yes. But you have to care for yourself. Otherwise, nobody else will.
Yeah, for sure. Jen, thank you so much. Oh my gosh.
It's so fun.
I feel like I could just steal all your time. I could just take it all. But instead,
if you buy me coffee, I will.
Okay. Well, you know what? The next time I'm in Portland, that's happening. Which I like Portland. So I will be there very soon.
Yeah, no, it's a fun town. Just, I mean, the rain, we're both suffering from it right now. But it's okay.
You know what, though? I actually love the rain. Earlier, you talked about the July or the January and how it's so dark and whatever. And this is like my favorite time of the year. It's so funny.
It is cozy.
I'm so opposite. Yeah. I don't like spring or summer. I love fall, winter.
No, it is. It's cozy. I totally get it.
Get it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I honestly cannot thank you enough. I know our listeners are going to be so grateful for all the advice and just all the wisdom that you shared tonight.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, if you're hooked, you can subscribe to this podcast, follow along on social media at The Mama Stories, or visit the website, mamastories.com. And mamas, I love you.